wine glass hit the floor before I even understood why I'd dropped it. I remember that part clearly, the way the stems snapped against the polished oak, the burgundy spreading across the floorboards like something out of a crime scene. My maid of honor's hand was on my elbow, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything except the impossible image of my husband of 4 hours and 23 minutes, walking out the back door of the Cliffside Inn with his phone pressed against his ear and his shoulders set in a way I'd never seen before. I'm Margaret Holloway. I'm 41 now, and what I'm about to tell you happened 7 years ago, the night that should have been the happiest of my life. If you've ever loved someone so completely that their absence feels like a physical wound, stay with me. This story isn't really about him. It's about what came after and what came back. We were at the Cliffside Inn in Mendocino, California. I'd grown up driving past that place with my mother on our way to visit my grandmother in Fort Bragg, and I'd told my fiancé maybe 2 years before we got engaged that someday if I ever got married, I wanted it to be there. I never thought he was the kind of man who paid attention to throwaway lines like that. But 6 months before our wedding, he handed me an engagement ring at sunset on the very same cliff, and the inn was already booked. His name was Theo Brennan. He was 36 the night he disappeared, a structural engineer who designed bridges for a living and the steadiest man I had ever met. I'd been a senior associate at a corporate litigation firm in San Francisco when I met him at a charity gala I hadn't even wanted to attend. I'd just lost a case I'd worked on for 18 months. He spilled tonic water on my dress and apologized so sincerely, I ended up apologizing back. We were engaged within 2 years. I want you to understand something about Theo before I tell you what happened. He was not a charming man. He was not a man with a wandering eye. When my father died of a stroke 3 months before our wedding, Theo drove down to San Diego with me at midnight, sat on the floor of my mother's bathroom while she sobbed in the tub fully clothed, and held a cold washcloth against her forehead for 40 minutes without saying a word. He cooked. He left coffee on my nightstand every morning before he left for work. He had read every book I had ever recommended to him, including a 600-page novel about colonial Vietnam that he hated but finished anyway because I loved it. That was the man who walked out of our wedding reception. The ceremony itself had been small, just 60 people, my mother in the front row in a navy dress my father had picked out for her before he died, Theo's parents flying in from Boston, a string quartet playing in the garden. I'd written my own vows. So had he. He told me in front of everyone that I was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking, and I cried so hard during my own response that my best friend Daphne, my maid of honor, had to step forward and finish reading them for me. Then came the reception, the first dance to a Norah Jones song, the toasts. My uncle, half drunk and beaming, telling everyone that my father would have loved Theo. The cake. Everything was perfect, everything was on schedule, and then I noticed Theo standing by the window with his phone in his hand, staring at the screen like he'd just been shown something he couldn't comprehend. I remember thinking, please don't let it be his mother, please don't let her have fallen. I crossed the room with a smile still on my face because that's what you do at your own wedding. I touched his back, I said his name. He turned to me and his eyes were already gone. Somewhere past me, somewhere I couldn't follow. I have to go, he said. I laughed, because what else are you supposed to do? Honey, we are going. We have a flight at 11 tomorrow. No. Now. I have to go now. Theo, what's wrong? What happened? He looked at me for a long second, and I have replayed that look 10,000 times in the years since. There was no anger in it, no deceit. There was something closer to terror. He said, I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm so sorry. And then he turned and he walked out, and I stood there in the middle of the dance floor while 60 people pretended very hard not to be looking at me. Daphne was the one who ran after him. By the time I caught up to her at the front of the inn, his rental car was already turning out of the gravel lot. She was barefoot, holding her shoes in one hand. She didn't say anything. She just put her arms around me, and I dropped that wine glass and I started shaking. I don't remember the drive back to the city, I don't remember Daphne and my mother packing up my hotel room while I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wallpaper. What I remember is waking up the next morning still in my wedding dress, still in full makeup with mascara streaked all the way down to my collarbones, and my mother saying very gently, "Sweetheart, he hasn't called. Nobody's heard from him." For 3 days, I called Theo's phone every hour, straight to voicemail every time. His parents were flying back to Boston, terrified he'd been in an accident, calling hospitals. His best man, a college friend of his named Owen, drove up to Mendocino to look for him. Theo's car was found at SFO long-term parking. He had bought a one-way ticket to Newark with a credit card neither I nor his parents had known he kept. He had left me. He had actually, intentionally left me, in the middle of our wedding reception, on a flight he had to have purchased earlier that day. That was when I stopped functioning. I want to be honest about that part because I think anyone who's been through this kind of thing understands. I didn't have a graceful breakdown. I was a litigation attorney with a caseload of 46 matters, and I missed a deposition on a Tuesday and didn't realize until Friday. My firm was kind about it for exactly 2 weeks and then less kind. My mother flew up from San Diego and stayed in my apartment for a month, washing my hair when I forgot to and putting plates of food in front of me that I didn't eat. The worst part wasn't the abandonment. The worst part was the not knowing. Because Theo wasn't dead, his parents eventually heard from him. A single phone call from a number they didn't recognize, and they told me he was alive but not coming back. He wouldn't say why. He wouldn't speak to me. His mother, Catherine, who had welcomed me into their family with a warmth I wasn't used to, called me weeping and said, "Margaret, I don't know what's wrong with my son. I don't know who he is right now." 6 weeks after the wedding, I got a registered letter from a New Jersey law firm. Theo was filing for an annulment. He had hired an attorney and was claiming the marriage had been entered into under circumstances that compromised his capacity to consent. Whatever that meant, I signed the papers without reading the rest. My mother wanted me to fight it, to make him at least face me in a courtroom, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. That was June. By the following March, I had lost 28 pounds, transferred to my firm's family law division, because I couldn't stomach corporate work anymore, and developed a stress-induced ulcer that put me in urgent care twice. I was 35 years old and I had become someone I did not recognize. The thing that saved me wasn't a person at first, it was a dog. Daphne dragged me to a shelter in Oakland on a Saturday in April because she said I needed something alive in the apartment that wasn't her. I told her absolutely not. I was barely keeping a houseplant alive, and within 40 minutes I was driving home with an 8-year-old beagle mix named Biscuit who had been surrendered when his elderly owner died. He had cataracts, he snored. He climbed into my bed the first night and pressed his back against my ribs, and I cried into his fur for 2 hours and slept for the first time in 9 months. Biscuit is also how I met Wesley. Our apartment building had a small dog park behind it, just a fenced patch of grass with a bench. I started taking Biscuit there in the early mornings before work because I didn't have to talk to anyone at 6 a.m. There was one other person who came at that hour. A tall, quiet man with a black and tan Rottweiler mix named June, who had a limp in her back leg and the gentlest eyes I'd ever seen on an animal. He nodded at me the first morning. I nodded back. That went on for 2 weeks before either of us said anything. He was the one who finally broke the silence. June had wandered over and put her enormous head in my lap, and her owner came over apologetically to retrieve her. "She's very forward," he said. "I've talked to her about it." I laughed. It startled me. I hadn't laughed in a long time. His name was Wesley Park. He was 42, an emergency room nurse at UCSF Medical Center, and he was a widower. His wife Yoonji had died of a brain aneurysm 3 years earlier. He was raising their daughter, June, alone. June was 9. He told me all of this slowly over weeks of dog park mornings, the way you tell someone things when you're not trying to impress them, just laying it out so they know who you are. I told him about Theo eventually. Not all of it, just the bones. He listened the way people who work in emergency rooms listen, without flinching, without trying to fix it, without offering any of the empty things people say when they don't know what else to do. When I was done, he said, "That happened to you. That's a real thing that happened. I'm sorry." That was it. That was the whole response. I cannot tell you how much it meant to me. I met June about 5 months after I met Wesley. He invited me to a Saturday breakfast at a diner near their apartment very casually, and I sat across the booth from a thin little girl with her father's serious eyes and her mother's small, precise mouth. She studied me for about 90 seconds and then she said, "My dad says you make him laugh." "He doesn't laugh very much." I said, "Your dad makes me laugh too." She nodded, like a small judge accepting evidence into the record, and then she asked if she could share my hash browns. Wesley and I took 2.5 years to become anything. Neither of us was in a hurry. He had been ripped apart by his wife's death and was raising a child through grief. I had been left at the altar by a man I trusted more than anyone in the world. We were not naive people. When he finally kissed me, it was on his apartment balcony on June's 11th birthday, after she had fallen asleep on the couch with her head on my shoulder, and he said, "I'd like to do this properly, Maggie, if you want to." I wanted to. We moved in together when June was 12, bought a small house in Alameda when she was 13. Wesley proposed in our backyard on a Sunday morning in October, with June standing beside him holding a hand-lettered sign that said, "Please say yes to my dad and also to me." The ring had belonged to his grandmother. I said yes before he finished the question. "I want to tell you that I was completely fine by then. I want to tell you that I had healed and the past was the past, and I walked into wedding planning without a single cold sweat. I would be lying. The first dress shop sent me into a panic attack. The second one too. We ended up not having a traditional wedding at all. 40 people, a friend's vineyard in Sonoma. I wore a pale grey dress that wasn't a wedding dress. I wore flat sandals, and June, who was 14 by then and nearly as tall as I was, walked down the aisle ahead of me, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself the day before. Wesley stood at the end of the aisle with his hands in his pockets and tears on his face, and I walked toward him with my mother on my arm, and I felt steady. For the first time in 7 years, I felt steady. The ceremony was small and brief. My uncle officiated, the same uncle who had drunkenly toasted my father at the first wedding. He kept it together. We all did. June read a poem she'd written about families being made, not just born, and there were maybe 4 people in the audience who weren't crying. The reception was at a long farmhouse table set up under an oak tree. White lights, bowls of pasta, bottles of Zinfandel from the vineyard. I was sitting between Wesley and June, refilling my mother's wine glass, when I noticed Daphne's expression change. She was looking at something behind me and her face had gone very still. "Mags," she said quietly. Wesley's hand found mine under the table. I turned around. He was standing by the gate at the entrance to the property, 20 yards away, half in shadow under the trees, but I would have recognized him in any light. Theo. He was thinner. His hair was almost completely grey, which startled me. He had been a man with very dark hair, just 36 years old when I'd seen him last. He was wearing a button-down shirt that hung loosely on his frame, and he was standing very still, like a man who had walked himself to the edge of a cliff and was trying to remember how he'd gotten there. For a second, the entire reception stopped. People follow eye lines, even at parties. Wesley stood up beside me. So did Daphne. My mother, on the other side of the table, made a small sound I hadn't heard from her since my father died. Theo didn't come closer. He just stood at the gate with his hands at his sides and waited. "I'll go," Wesley said. "No?" I was surprised by how clearly my own voice came out. "I'll go." June's hand closed around my wrist. "Mom." She had been calling me Mom for about a year by then, casually, like it had always been the case. "Do you want me to come?" "No, baby. Stay here." "I won't be long." I walked across the grass in my flat sandals toward the man who had walked out on me 7 years ago. Wesley walked beside me. I had told him a long time ago that if Theo ever showed up, I wouldn't speak to him alone, and Wesley had never asked me to explain why. He just understood. Theo saw us coming and put both hands up, palms out, like he was trying to show he wasn't a threat. I'm not staying, he said when we got close. His voice was hoarse. I had to come. I didn't say anything. Wesley didn't either. We stood there. I know I have no right to be here, Theo said. I know that. I tried to write to you. I wrote you about 100 letters over the years. I never sent any of them because I knew they wouldn't change anything. But your mother, I called your mother 2 weeks ago and she told me you were getting married today and I couldn't. I had to. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. I'm not making sense. I'm sorry. You called my mother. My voice came out cold. I hadn't known I could sound like that 3 times. She didn't tell you. She told me not to come. I came anyway. Wesley spoke for the first time. You need to say what you came to say and then you need to go. Theo nodded. He looked at Wesley with something like gratitude, which was strange. Then he looked at me. Maggie, I owe you the truth. I should have given you the truth 7 years ago, and I didn't because I was a coward and because I made the wrong choice in the worst moment of my life, and I have spent every single day since then knowing it. He took a breath. The text I got at the reception, it wasn't from another woman. There was no other woman. There has never been another woman. I waited. It was from my brother. He had a brother. I knew he had a brother. Older, lived in New Jersey, estranged. I had met him exactly once. My brother had been drinking again. He'd been sober for 4 years and he started drinking again about a month before our wedding, and I didn't tell you because I don't know what I was. I thought I could handle it. He texted me from the bathroom of a bar in Newark that night and he said he was going to do it. He had a bottle of pills he'd been saving. He told me he was going to do it that night, and he was telling me because he wanted someone to know. I felt my hand cover my mouth. I tried to call him. He wouldn't pick up. I called 911 in Newark, and I tried to give them an address, and I didn't know which bar it was. He wouldn't answer. Maggie, I didn't think. I just got on a plane. I got the next flight to Newark. I couldn't think about anything except getting to him before he did it. Theo, I said, and my voice was someone else's voice. I found him. He was alive. He was in an alley behind the bar and he was alive, and I got him to a hospital and they pumped his stomach and he was in a psychiatric facility for 3 months, and I sat in the waiting room of that hospital for 36 hours, and somewhere in that time I realized what I'd done. I realized what I had done to you, and He stopped and pressed both hands against his face. I couldn't come back. I couldn't face you. I had abandoned you on our wedding day, and I couldn't make myself pick up the phone, and the longer I waited, the more impossible it became. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself you were better off thinking I was a monster than knowing I was someone who couldn't choose. But the truth is I just couldn't face what I'd done, so I stayed in New Jersey. I took care of my brother. And I let you think whatever you needed to think to move on. The silence after he stopped speaking was the loudest silence of my life. Why are you telling me this now? I said. I sounded calm. I wasn't calm. Because your mother told me you were getting married, and I realized that all these years I'd let you carry it alone, the not knowing. I let you build a life on a story that wasn't true. And even if you didn't need the truth to build the life, and clearly you didn't, you have built something beautiful. I owed it to you. I owed you the truth before you walked into another marriage carrying that question. You don't get to give me anything, I said. You don't get to show up at my wedding and unburden yourself and feel better. I don't feel better. Maggie, I don't feel better. Maggie, I don't feel better. I will never feel better. I am telling you this because you deserve to know 7 years ago, and the only thing worse than telling you now would be never telling you at all. I looked at him. Really looked. I saw a man who had aged 15 years in 7. I saw a man who had been carrying something for a very long time. I saw also a man who had made a choice on the worst night of his life and then made a worse choice every single day after, for years, by not coming home, by not picking up the phone, by not trusting me enough to let me decide what kind of wife I would have been to a man whose brother almost died, because that was the part that finally landed. I would have understood. I was a litigator. I was a woman who had sat in a hospital waiting room with my own dying father 6 months before our wedding. I would have gotten on the plane with him. I would have married him in a hospital chapel if that's what it took. He hadn't lost me by leaving. He had lost me by not coming back. "Is your brother alive?" I asked. "Yes, he's been sober now for 6 years. He's married. He has a little girl. Maggie, I'm glad he's alive. Truly. Maggie, I'm glad he's alive. Truly. And I'm sorry for what you went through that night. I am. But you don't get to come here." My voice was shaking now, but I didn't stop. "You don't get to walk up to my second wedding and hand me an explanation 7 years late and expect me to do anything with it. I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you anything. I built this life out of the wreckage of what you did, and the man standing next to me put his hands in the wreckage with me and helped me build it. So I'm going to walk back to that table now, and I'm going to eat dinner with my husband and my daughter, and you are going to leave." He nodded. He was crying quietly, the way a grown man cries when he has been waiting a long time to be allowed to. "Thank you for listening," he said. "Don't thank me." "Okay." "Theo," I stopped. "There was one more thing. Don't contact my mother again. Don't send letters. Don't come to anything else. If you have anything else to say to me, you've said it. We're done." "Okay, Maggie." I turned around. Wesley turned around with me. We walked back across the grass to the table, and June was standing up watching me, and when I got close enough, she put her arms around me without asking, and I held her there for a long time. My mother was crying. Daphne had the bottle of Zinfandel in her hand, and a look on her face that suggested she had been about to march across the lawn and physically remove him. "Is he gone?" my mother asked. I looked back. The gate was empty. "He's gone. I want to tell you about the part that came after, because I think it matters." Wesley and I went on our honeymoon to a cabin in Big Sur 3 days later. On the first night, sitting on the deck with a glass of wine, I told him every single thing Theo had said, every word. Wesley listened the way he listens, all the way through, no interruption, no judgment. When I was done, he said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a long time. "I feel sorry for him," I said finally, "and I'm angry with him, and I'm not going to do anything with either of those feelings. I'm going to eat dinner with you, and I'm going to call my mother in the morning, and I'm going to sleep." He kissed me on the forehead. "That's a good plan," he said. "I have not seen Theo since. I have not heard from him. I made my mother promise, and she did with tears, that she would not pass along messages. I do not know if he writes. I do not want to know. Here is the thing I learned, the thing I want to leave you with, because I know some of you watching this have been left too. Some of you have been left without a word, without an explanation the way I was, and you've been carrying the not knowing for a long time, and you have built whole architectures of pain around it, trying to figure out what was wrong with you. The answer, almost always, is nothing. You did not cause it. You were not the reason. Whatever was happening in that other person's life when they made the choice to leave, it was their wound, not yours. They handed it to you because they didn't have the strength to carry it themselves, and that does not make you weak. It makes them human in a small and disappointing way. But here is the other thing. The forgiveness people will tell you to extend. You don't owe it. You don't owe an explanation back to the person who didn't give you one. You don't owe them a place at your second wedding. You don't owe them peace. What you owe yourself is the life you build after. The dog you adopt at a shelter. The man at the dog park who doesn't try to fix you. The little girl who calls you mom one Tuesday morning like it's the most natural word in the world. The vineyard in Sonoma. The small grey dress. The mother walking you down the aisle for the second time and meaning it more. That's the life. That's the only thing you owe. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 41 years old, and I am married to a man named Wesley Park, and we are raising a daughter named June, and on most Saturday mornings we walk our dogs in the park behind our apartment and watch the fog roll in off the bay. Biscuit is 12 now. June is older. They walk slowly. So do we. There is no hurry anymore. There is just this, the life that came after, and it is, against all of my expectations 7 years ago, enough. When I look back on those 7 years now, the part that still surprises me isn't what Theo did, it's what I did with what he did. Because the truth is, his choice to walk out of our reception was one moment. One terrible, panicked, selfish moment. What turned that single moment into 7 years of damage was every subsequent choice he made, to not call, to not write, to not come home, to let me build my life on a story that wasn't true. That is what I want anyone watching this to understand. The wound is rarely the first cut. The wound is what we do or fail to do every day after. I think a lot now about cause and effect, about the way one decision creates the conditions for the next. Theo chose silence, and silence chose for both of us. He spared himself the discomfort of the conversation, and in doing so, he handed me 7 years of self-doubt. I have asked myself many times what I would have done if he had simply called from the airport that night and told me about his brother. I would have gotten on the plane. I would have stood in that hospital with him. I am as sure of that as I am of anything. He underestimated me, and his underestimation cost us both more than either of us could have imagined. But here is what I want you to hold on to, the part that took me a long time to understand. I cannot control what other people do to me. I can only control what I do next. When Theo left, I had no power. When Theo came back to my second wedding 7 years later and tried to hand me his confession like a gift, I had every kind of power. And the difference between those two moments was not luck. It was the slow, unglamorous work of choosing, day after day, to keep going. Adopting Biscuit when I didn't want a dog. Going to the dog park at 6 in the morning when I would rather have stayed in bed, letting a quiet man with a wounded Rottweiler ask me how I was, and answering him honestly. Letting a 9-year-old girl share my hash browns. Resilience is not a thunderclap. It is not a moment of grand decision. It is hash browns and dog walks and washing your hair on the days you don't want to. It is the small, repeated act of refusing to let someone else's worst night write the rest of your story. And forgiveness, let me be clear about this, is not the same as opening the door again. I forgave Theo in the end, in the only way that mattered. I stopped letting him live rent-free in my chest. I stopped wondering, but I did not invite him back into my life, and I did not owe him absolution, and I do not regret that for a single second. Sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is protect the life you have built from the person who tried, intentionally or not, to take it from you. Wesley taught me that. June taught me that. Biscuit taught me that, in his own slow, snoring way. The life that comes after is not a consolation prize. It is the actual prize. It is the only one there ever was.